Good morning, everybody. Lovely to see all of you. Can everybody see and hear me? Which is always a good start.
Yes.
Brilliant. Great. So just to echo Meenakshi's welcome, thank you so much to all of our delegates today for joining Equality Leaders at our LGBTQ plus Inclusion Summit today. It's a real honor for me to be in conversation with Nari, Guchatan, Saski, and Jeffrey this morning on how we can partner with LGBTQ plus communities in meaningful ways so that we begin to step away from the pink washing and begin to affect the impactful change that is needed. Kevin Humphreys does send his apologies as he's unable to join us today as previously planned. Just know, Kevin, that you will be missed and we wish you a speedy recovery. So in this panel, we'll be discussing topics of rainbow capitalism, community partnerships, exclusion, marginalization, allyship, as well as our commitments to accountability and transparency. I also want to take a moment to acknowledge that we by no means represent the LGBTQ plus community in its entirety here today. And so before we dive in, I think it's important that each of us share with everybody who we are, how we self-identify, so that they're aware of our positionality and how our identities inform our conversation. So I'll kickstart off things. My name is Dylan. My pronouns are he, him, or she, her. I self-identify as a South African, white, gender-fluid gay man. I am an immigrant living here in sunny-ish London today. I've also been privileged enough to have been university educated and have English as my native tongue. So Nari, would you like to introduce yourself to everybody?
Okay, thank you, Dylan. Hi, good morning to you, everyone. Again, my name is Narishige Kato. I'm the director of HR Strategy Division at Japan Airlines. And I consider myself to be he or him. And I've started my career with Japan Airlines since 2005. So I've got 17-year career with Japan Airlines. And in my career, I've spent 3 years in the UK, and which was really meaningful experience for me, because it was my first experience for me to lead a life as a member of a minority group in a society. I will talk a bit about this later again. And anyways, thank you very much for giving me such a wonderful opportunity to talk with you about LGBTQ plus people or community. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nari. How about yourself, Guchatan?
Thank you very much, Dylan. Hi, everyone. My name is Guchatan or Nanu. My pronouns are they, he. I identify as queer in all senses. I'm from the, I'm born to Sikh migrant parents from Punjab. I'm born and raised in the UK. Of practicing faith as a Sikh. Currently based in Geneva, Switzerland, where I've been working here for nearly 16 years in the International Labour Organization, which is a specialized UN agency, which I've now left as of 1st of March. I'm now part of ILGA World. ILGA World is the largest global federation of civil society organizations working on LGBTI rights issues. The way I like to see ourselves is similar to the gay version or the LGBTIQ plus version of the UN. We bring LGBTIQ plus civil society and members, communities together to build consensus on the direction our communities would wish to go in. So that's our work. Working now as Director of Program at ILGA World. Thank you.
Welcome, Guchatan. Thank you so much. How about yourself, Saski?
Hi, good morning, everybody. Thank you for having me. Really excited to be here. So a bit about myself. I am an out and proud fabulous lesbian. Always like to get that one in. My pronouns are she, her. In terms of the work that I do, I kind of do lots of different things within the LGBTQ plus community, namely as an LGBTQ plus inclusion training consultant. I'm also an official Pride host, and I am a radio and podcast interviewer with some various different magazines within the LGBTQ+ community. I like to say that any of the work that I do is about how I can positively spotlight the LGBTQ+ community, whether that's through inclusion training and consulting, interviewing people within the community that are doing great things to promote and make positive change as well. And I also work in schools with young people and teachers to create inclusion and help tackle homophobic, biphobic and transphobic bullying as well. So that's me.
Amazing. Welcome, Saskia. And Jeffrey, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, good morning. Thank you very much, Dylan. Thank you, everyone else here. It's going to be a really interesting chat. Good morning to everyone. So I'm Jeff. My pronouns are he, him. I identify as a gay man, and I am British, white, Caucasian, cis male. Those bits are all very, very unexciting. So I'm currently based in London. As I say, I'm British. I do split my time between London and Vancouver. My husband is Canadian. Until fairly recently, three or 4 months ago, I was managing director at Macquarie Group, where I was also the long-standing chair of the LGBTQ+ network, and very thrilled to have taken them to #1 on this year's Stonewall rankings, at which point I left them and set up my own DE&I consulting, and especially LGBTQ+ consulting organization called the Inclusion Imperative, and trying to use that as the platform to do what I did at Macquarie. And on the subject of what we're talking about today, galvanizing, organizations as agents of change, this is exactly the sort of thing that I'm now spending my time doing.
Perfect. Thank you so much, everybody. Really excited, and we don't have a lot of time, so I'm just going to jump straight in. Nari, if I could come to you first, as we have, a global audience here with us today, would you like to start our discussion by sharing with us the Japanese context and a little more on the LGBTQ+ community life in the country?
Okay, thank you, Dylan. I'll do so. Everyone, again, my name is Nari, and I'm the director of Japan Airlines HR strategy. And I'm responsible for the promotion of diversity and inclusion internally, both internally and externally at Japan Airlines, which includes planning and implementing policies to create supportive environment for all in the workplace. And in my job, I'm hoping to create safer place to all of the employees in my company, and hopefully to the people in a society as well. And as Dylan kindly suggested, I will talk about a little bit about what is going on related to LGBTQ+ community or people in Japan. But before that, let me briefly explain my own experience in the UK. As I previously mentioned, I've got a 17-year career with the Japan Airlines, and I spent 3 years in the UK from 2013 and to 2016. And that was really significant experience, especially in terms of my current responsibilities, because again, it was my first experience as a member of a minority group in a society. And actually, I've learned a lot what it means to lead life as a member of minority group in a society. And one of the most important things I've learned is that if you want to have a decent life in a society, you need to have a safe place in that society. And more importantly, to have this kind of safe place is totally dependent on whether or not the other people in the society appropriately understand your existence, maybe hopefully cultural background, or social system, inclusive legislation or laws, works fairly for you, or your human rights are respected. And these are really important elements from my own experience, for especially those who lead life as a marginalized group in a society, I think. So bearing these in mind, I'd like to talk a bit about, explain the rough landscape with regard to LGBTQ+ people or community in Japan, especially from the perspective, two perspectives. One is social understanding, and the other one is legislation. And to put it really roughly, I think the the current environment surrounding LGBTQ plus people in Japan is, I think, lagging behind most of Western countries or areas. But however, at the same time, having said so, concerning social understanding, I think it has rapidly progressed for the last 10 years. For example, one research shows that in 2015, while only 37% of Japanese people knew what LGBT stands for, as of 2020, more than 80% of Japanese people knew what LGBT means. However, at the same time, it apparently looks the social understanding of LGBTQ plus community is on good progress. However, unfortunately, the same research shows that half of the 80% of the people who answered they understand what LGBT means said they are not interested in LGBTQ plus community. So that means they just know the existence of the kind of community. However, they feel, half of them feel that the community has not directly anything to do with them. So that is one social issue, I think. And let's move on to another point, the legislation. From a perspective of legislation, I think there still leaves much to be desired in Japanese society as well. For example, when we look at a group of 7 countries, I think, unfortunately, I have to say Japan is the only country that does not legally allow same-sex marriage or adoption for LGBTQ plus people couples. Or in addition, there is no anti-discrimination laws that bans the discrimination based on their gender identity to LGBTQ plus people. So this is the reason why activities related to LGBTQ plus communities in Japan tends to ask for or require a good legislation system, especially related to marriage or anti-discrimination. That is what's going on in Japanese society. And of course, there are many other incidental or related relevant problems with regard to LGBTQ plus community. However, at the same time, I think I can see there are some good movements as well in Japanese society, especially in terms of partnership perspective. Like I previously said, it's still unfortunately illegal same-sex marriage in Japan. However, recently, many local governments or local municipalities have started to introduce some kind of partnership program or for LGBTQ plus people, or start to issue some certificate, partnership certificate for LGBTQ plus couples. And this is really, really good things. So as far as they live in the area, they are to some extent protected by local governments law or local municipalities law. So that is really a good point. And lastly, I'd like to indicate here the important roles of a company. As an employee of an airline company, I think Japan Airlines, or we have 2 important roles related to LGBTQ plus communities. One is to foster social awareness or understanding to LGBTQ plus communities. And the other one is to become a role model in a society, to move things forward, to move society to good directions. And regarding first point, I think, for example, Japan Airlines is the first Japanese company that operated flight charter named LGBT Ally Charter. And I think one of the most important roles as a company is to connect people or community within Japanese area, at least. So we have decided to charter flight, LGBT Ally Charter, to make a good appeal to a society, to have more people get interested in LGBTQ plus people's community. And I think to some extent, we have succeeded in this point. And Or, of course, Japan Airlines so far have co-sponsored many Pride or Rainbow type of events held in a variety of areas within Japan. And it was really important initiatives, because once we have an event where LGBTQ plus people or people in the local communities gather and communicate directly with each other, then they will get more familiar with LGBTQ plus community. And once the more they're interested in LGBTQ plus communities, the more proposals there will, come out in the society. And that's good things. And we trust we can play this kind of important role in a society as a company. And
absolutely.
Yes. So maybe each of these efforts may be small. However, we trust the accumulation of these small efforts will bring positive, huge change in a society. So that is why we're trying to make every effort to do so. So that's about all from me for now. Thank you.
No, thank you so much, Nara. And I think you bring up a really wonderful point there. In speaking to the role businesses, organizations have in fostering that social awareness, as you say, but also using business as a force for good. And I guess, that sets us up for our discussion here today, because that's exactly what it is we're wanting to talk about here. So Saskia, if I could come over to you and perhaps ask you, what do we mean then by pinkwashing or rainbow capitalism? These are terms that we use a lot, especially when it comes to Pride Month and the role businesses play in that. And I guess I'd also like to ask you, do you believe that this threatens the movement in its march towards true equality?
Yeah, I mean, I think when we think about pinkwashing, there's various different elements to kind of what that means if we break it down. I guess from a more full-on political stance, pinkwashing is basically thinking about the strategy of where we're promoting, or companies are promoting, LGBT plus rights and protections as almost like evidence, if you like, of liberalism and democracy, especially kind of to distract from legitimize even violence against other countries or communities rather. So looking at basically saying, we're okay now because we've slapped a rainbow on some brands. I think more broadly speaking, and what many people will probably see and notice more when we think about pinkwashing, is obviously during Pride Month, where we see brands that pinkwash, they take the opportunity to kind of profit or capitalize off the rainbow and the LGBTQ plus community, the pink pound, if you like, and what that stands for. And they often do that through merchandise, or food or clothing, however that looks, or even just in advertisements. But then what we see is often, well, in a lot of cases, is, after Pride Month, when everything's quieting down, those companies, those brands that were all there as allies, shining brightly for us, are nowhere to be seen. And of course that is damaging, because if you think about it in the wider perspective, it gives the illusion that as far as the LGBTQ plus community goes, we're okay, we have allies and we have big support. But the reality of that is that, we're still seeing a rising homophobic, biphobic, transphobic hate crime in the UK, for example. We still have homophobic, biphobic, transphobic bullying in schools that is on the rise too. And it's often those companies that are kind of pinkwashing that are the ones that are not making those changes within the workplace. They don't have inclusion training. They don't update their policies. They're just literally, there for the shiny element of pride with nowhere to see. And I'm sure other people on the panel can kind of elaborate and share experiences too. But I think the problem with that, as I say, is that it gives the illusion that the community is okay. And we only just have to think about what we've heard in the start of this summit. That just goes to show globally, and sadly, it feels that we're already going backwards.
Thank you, Saskia. Yeah, there seems to be this regression, right? So where Nari was speaking of Japan having a long way to go, comparatively speaking, to us here within Europe, UK, and North America, it seems, well, we're actually, regressing in so many ways, which is terrifying and damaging and harmful in so many ways. Jeffrey or Gurchattan, did you want to elaborate on what Saskia had to say?
I'd happily come in for a bit, because I always like to chip in. But the points made so far are, completely, ones I fully agree with. I mean, there is a real danger here, and I think we need to be careful, though. I mean, obviously, there is value in any of this to the extent that it promotes awareness. This is important. So, as Nari was saying, I mean, having an LGBTQ flight, even if we look at it cynically and think, is that actually performative or tokenistic? It's boosting awareness, and in places like Japan, that's obviously very necessary. And for an awful lot of the populace, even in places where I'm sitting now in London, this is not something that collides with their world on a day-to-day basis. So promoting awareness is good. What we don't need is awareness to stop on June the 30th. This is a year-round endeavor, and we also don't need to think that as Saskia says, slapping a rainbow on it is a very easy way for them to be performative and make them feel like, okay, job done. It isn't. And similarly, on a micro basis, I think pink washing can actually be something that have organizations practice by just sort of wheeling out a role model who just happens to have all of the characteristics that they want to be saying, look, we're supportive of. So you'll see lots of photos of people who happen to be black and gay and ticking boxes. This is tokenistic, and this is not what we want. So there is a macro aspect to it and a micro aspect to it. What we want is real change. We need them to be organizations as agents of change, pushing for systemic improvements that we can't rely upon governments to do. These are the people who've got the purse strings. These are the people who actually can put the pressure on governments to make change that we need, and we need it to happen all the time. At Macquarie, where I was before, as I said, we actually did publish an article on the Macquarie website, right, very prominently saying Pride is a year-round endeavor. I co-authored that article, so obviously I'm quite proprietary. I'm feeling very passionate about it, but we wanted very specifically the world to know that this is something at Macquarie that we do. When I was there, we were doing all day, every day. It's not something that you stop doing at the end of June.
Thank you, Jeff. Gurchattan, before I move on, I don't want to exclude you. Did you have any thoughts or reflections?
No, I totally agree with both the points Saskia and Jeff have made. I think it also needs to go beyond our communities. And by that, I mean there are intrinsic human rights and human rights violations which companies participate in, or which indirectly impact our communities. Let's look at the principle and the value of freedom of association and freedom of assembly. We wouldn't have prides without freedom of assembly. We wouldn't have Pride civil society organizations or LGBTI organizations without freedom of association. Yet, we know large multinationals around the world are making damaging, if not divisive decisions to actually thwart freedom of association by going after trade unions. And trade unions, and by doing so, it's negatively impacting our communities. Right? So freedom of association is a value and a principle that all organizations, all businesses must uphold, but not just for our communities, but for all communities, including the labor workforce. Right? So that's very, very important. So on one hand, we cannot say, yes, we want ERGs and yes, we want the right, but then go and as an LGBTI community also say we don't want unions. Sorry, it doesn't work like that. The freedom of association is a principle for all and a value for all, and so does the freedom of assembly. And then I think that the second part is we come to the pink pound or the pink dollar. Great, fantastic. But tax injustice is something that really hurts our communities. If your company, your employer is not paying its fair share of its tax bill and engaging in tax avoidance activities, it negatively impacts our communities. Why? Cuts down funding for social programs for our communities, pushes and drives LGBTIQ plus people consequently below lines of poverty. If we look at LGBTI people that are doing very, very well, fraction of the communities that are doing, successfully well, living above poverty line. Let's look what's happening right now in the UK with the rising rate of inflation. What's going to happen to our communities that are living below poverty lines and barely being able to put food on the table, that are engaging in gig work and gig economy, and where employers who are engaging in the platform economy are pushing down and thwarting regulation. Great, not all regulation is necessary, and we need to look at what is good and what is bad, but regulation is crucial, and we need to make sure that large businesses are adhering to that, but they're not at the cost of small businesses, which are, you've got in the UK nearly 5.5 million small SMEs. That 99% of them are, sole traders, and we can't have big businesses saying, yes, we agree to red tape, when in fact it's going to, impact small businesses. And those small businesses are also LGBTI entrepreneurs as well. So I think it really requires a good discussion, and we're not there yet. We're not there yet because we're not actually engaging in those bigger employment policy discussions. We don't have our leaders at the table making sure that those dialogues are happening with our own communities. Thank you.
And, just building on from that, Guchatan, I guess my question then is, how do we then begin changing the narrative, right, to bridge that gap between the local and the national discussions, the national and even international discussions at that policy level, and how do we go about building the enabling conditions, right, to drive this change? I appreciate these are big questions, but I'd be curious to know your thoughts on that.
Well, the key thing here is we don't live single silo lives. Our lives are intersectional. So my struggles are the struggles of, or someone else's struggles are my struggles indirectly. It's the issue of climate justice right now, food insecurity. That's my struggle as well. So, and looking at the intersections of that struggle are really, really key. How is it impacting? We have populations in LGBTI communities in Pacific parts of the world, in the Pacific, in Oceania, in small island states, which are which have LGBTI people living there, and are also impacted by climate change, food insecurity as well. Let's look at the issue of bodily autonomy. Let's look at the right to menstrual hygiene, menstrual justice. This impacts our communities as well. So we cannot just champion and wave the flag and say this is about our rights if we're not standing up for other people. And that means that and other communities, and building that solidarity with other communities. So how are we doing that? We can't just be standing up and saying and expecting other people to stand up for us when we don't stand up for them. So, and that comes down to capacity, right? We can't be there everywhere. So how do we enable and mobilize our leaders, our members of our community to engage in other fora as well? And that comes down to education. And again, that comes down to resources, putting the time behind that and building that knowledge set as well, which is not easy, and it takes time to do so. And I think then by doing mobilizing our communities and building their knowledge and their capacity, we can then prepare a future generation of leaders to engage in national dialogues, even engage in international dialogues as well. Many LGBTIQ+ or trade unionists that I know have met in my previous life at the International Labour Organization come from the LGBTI communities, right? Where are where do we see other people coming in from our movements in those international fora as well, and championing our rights at that sort of level? Very, very few, in fact. So it also comes down to creating those spaces for that to happen as well. Thanks.
Thank you so much. I mean, there's so much there, right, to unpack. But I think what really stood out to me is acknowledging that community interconnectedness, right? That we are a part of many different communities, and we need to start not just standing in solidarity with one another, but start opening those channels of communication and seeing how we can support one another and build to move forward. And I also love your point, Guchatan, on growing leaders, growing future leaders, right, that really do want to have these conversations, want to do the work.
Can I just give you a concrete example as well?
Yes, please.
Last year in Geneva, last year in Switzerland, there was a big referendum for. There were 2 referendums, democracy in action. Fantastic, right? We have a referendum on marriage equality. We can debate whether that's right or wrong, but there's also another referendum on increasing tax on certain corporations. Everyone was like, yes, we need marriage equality. But you ask members of our community, how are you going to vote when it comes to tax justice? No, I don't want to give more money to poor people. And that was the response I heard time and time again from wealthy LGBTIQ plus members from our community saying, why should we vote yes for this? Well, hang on, you know, it's great you can have marriage equality, but how are you going to even afford for your wedding? You know, what are you going to even eat and pay for your wedding? How are you going to make sure that LGBTIQ plus people that are living in poverty, they're doing well? It impacts us. So it really, I think it's very, very short-sighted and narrow, short-sighted of our communities. Yes, we want marriage equality, but we need to also go further than that. And that's why at ILGA World, where we work, our gold standard is not marriage equality. It is not marriage equality. It is constitutional change. Which countries have got LGBTIQ plus rights embedded into their constitution? And there's a handful of those countries. And that's what our long-term vision and goal should be.
Go ahead.
Thank you. And yeah, totally agree. And I think it's something that I often talk about as well. I think that's just a prime example of why, you know, allyship is absolutely so important, because often when people, you know, there's so many different layers to the changes, you know, as Kachalson says, you know, that we need to change and we need to think about. And often, you know, when people think that, oh, it doesn't affect me directly, therefore it's not my issue, it's totally the wrong attitude, whether you're part of the LGBTQ community or not, because ultimately all of this discrimination, all this marginalisation will have that knock-on effect one way or another, you know, whether it's in your everyday life or on a global scale. And that's exactly what we're seeing. So I think it's really important that, you know, people do start to maybe realise and understand that, you know, it might not directly affect you, but actually in the big scheme of things in the long term, it's really going to have a massive effect. And I appreciate that not everyone can be those, you know, game changers. They can't be the leaders. They can't, you know, but we can actually all do something small. And that can even just be, you know, being an ally within your workplace, you know, or, you know, it's the simple things that can sometimes make the biggest change.
Absolutely. And I think, you know, when we do start having conversations around allyship, and we'll touch on that a little bit later in the session, I think people have this perhaps misguided misconception that it always has to be something grand, right? So to your point, Saskia, it actually just requires a willingness and an intention, right, to make small little changes or committed actions in your everyday that really can make a huge difference. So thank you so much for bringing that up. Jeff, if I could come to you, because you mentioned, I think your words were agents of change, right? And so I'd love to hear your thoughts on whether you believe that organizations and leaders and the, you know, growing our future leaders, can they engage in activism? Can they become true agents of change?
Thank you. And well, I could answer that very simply. Yes, they absolutely can. But obviously I've got more to say than that. Not only can they, I think they must. I mean, we genuinely cannot rely upon, you know, organizations like governments and you know, local authorities to do this. They don't have the platforms that the organizations do, and particularly international organizations, brands that really do have a lot of not only purchasing power, but social influence as well. So the problem is often, and Nanu touched on this actually, I mean, and Saskia was kind of in the same area as well. You know, a lot of them are willing conceptually to do it, but actually ask them to walk it, not talk it, and you know, they start to flinch. If you mention the word activism in a commercial setting, people run screaming, like, you know, don't expect me to make political comments. So we have, I mean, irritating as that is, we have to find ways to make them, to push them to become agents of change. And even if that means we have to sell it in a different way. So, you know, we call it advocacy rather than activism. You can be an advocate, a supporter of this, and help champion the cause. You don't have to be waving a political placard to do that. There are other ways of creating pressure and using your social influence and your purchasing power to help promote that and to put pressure on governments and other institutions to actually make the systemic change that we know that, you know, the organizations actually do want, but they are hesitant to alienate their customer base, or what some of their customer base by actually saying they want it. You know, we can push them in this direction. I mean, everybody knows the business case around DE&I and specifically LGBTQ plus inclusion. I could talk for hours about that. I think most people know it enough. There's also the moral case, of course. So put those two together. And, you know, the moral case is pretty strong for a lot of corporates. You see it now, if we pitch it now as part of the ESG agenda, which is very, very clearly what everybody wants organizations to be buying into. This is, you know, the S in that is pretty blooming fundamental. And we need organizations to be championing that cause. And they are powerful. You know, I mean, we just look at somebody like Disney in Florida. I mean, the Florida situation has been a bit of a train wreck for everyone recently. But if you look at the clout that somebody like Disney has, bringing in reportedly $75 billion per annum to state revenues, $5 or $6 million in state taxes, and employing nearly 500 million people, you know, that is ridiculous clout. And if you can't use that, then there's something wrong. And of course, they can use that. My own favorite example actually is in Singapore, where I used to live. You know, Singapore, it's technically illegal to be gay or LGBTQ plus in Singapore still, but that hasn't stopped a groundswell of organizations trying to get things happening. And since 2009, there has been a Pride in Hong Lim Park in Singapore. It's not called Pride, it's called Pink Dot, but it's Pride. And it's a celebration of all things LGBTQ. And initially, it was very heavily supported by large foreign brands like JP Morgan and Barclays, and a lot of social media companies like Google and Facebook and Twitter, etc. Then in 2017, the government kind of, you know, we don't really like this. It is actually technically illegal to be gay. They changed the rules and said you have to be a majority Singapore-owned company to sponsor this and to support the demonstrations there. Everybody thought it would wither on the vine. Not at all. 40 local organizations, 40 local companies in Singapore were sponsors of that organization, that event, Pink Dot, last year. The example had been set by the efforts that were being done since 2009 by organizations that have the clout, and organizations clubbing together with solidarity, you know, intersectionally as well, saying we're not in this alone. 40 of us will have a very active and firm and loud voice that the government will have to listen to. We're not going to be quiet. And these are the sort of things that we can ask organizations to do, work together and actually champion the causes that on your own you may not actually be able to do that much about, but you are still an agent of change, and try to amplify your voice as best you can. So there are plenty of ways that we can do it, and we can ask, and we should ask and expect corporates and organizations to be those agents of change through things like that.
Mm. Thank you so much, Jeffrey. And to this point, we actually have a question from one of our delegates, Alice Roworth. And her question is, how can a small business, which does not have the power of a large corporation to push legislation and policy, etc., effectively support the LGBTQIA plus community in a meaningful manner? So we've already touched upon some of this, but yeah, I open it to the panel, whoever would like to answer Alice's question. Go ahead, Kachatan.
That's okay. You go.
Okay. I think there's so very, very quickly, sort of from a macro level, there's power in numbers. Small businesses make up 5.5 million in the UK, just in the UK alone, and it's 90, and they employ around say 99% of the UK workforce, if not sole traders, with 0 to 49 employees. Small businesses can team up, become part of federations. There's a Small Business Federation in the UK, and therefore, you know, coming together, advocating for better regulation. Now, I know small businesses are not always favorable to regulation because, you know, they have to bear the weight of it. But looking at regulation which makes sense and which is smart, which is practical for them and helps them reach their goals and helps reach our goals as well. And also levels out a playing field. It's easy for big businesses, you know, they've got, you know, there's only 7,700 big businesses in the UK, where it's the smaller ones that have to carry the burden of large red tape. But how do we then make sure that they can reach those goals, you know, when it comes to things like equal pay for work of equal value, you know, making sure that their workforce is diverse, looking at their supply chain issues as well. Not just at tier 1, tier 2, but looking further down, tier 3, 4, where you're really going to see labor rights violations, where it's unregulated, unlegislated, and unprotected workers. So those are the areas I think small businesses can really, really help make an impact. So yeah, just from a macro perspective. Thank you.
Thank you. Good chatting.
Yeah, and again, just to add to that, you know, again with small businesses, it's often difficult to have a voice in many ways. But even from the grassroots level, you know, what they're doing on a daily basis for their employees, creating that safe space, how does that reflect from their website? How does that reflect in their policies? You know, are staff able to be open and out? Do they feel comfortable? Do they have ERGs within their, you know, workplace? And things like that. And again, not often, but also making sure that that's not just during Pride Month, making sure that is an all-round, an all-year-round supportive thing. So there are lots of different things, and each company will have a different version of what that looks like. So I guess a good thing is to actually talk to your employees as well. What do they want? What do they feel might be needed? Because often, you know, as people say, you know, it's all well and good talking the talk, but actually, if you don't really know how your employees feel, then how are you ever going to really understand or make any real changes that are impactful? And then obviously with those changes, that's where, you know, that will grow, your business will grow because staff will stay, they want to stay, you get a better reputation, you know, and even though it should be like that, but that's the reality of that, isn't it? So, you know, what you actually put in will really show a positive impact and change in the difference you see and how you are kind of standing up as an ally, and again, in itself to say, this is what we're doing, and this is, you know, it goes back to the allyship. The small things, again, we are doing will make the bigger changes.
Mm-hmm. No, thank you. And I think I'd like to, you know, expand a little bit more on that point on, you know, bringing your employees or your people's voices into that decision-making process. You know, when you're putting together your people strategy, your business strategy, your DE&I strategy, all of these, you know, are interconnected. So I guess my question, and if I could come to you, Saskia, on this, because you've touched on it already, is, you know, what role do you believe employee resource groups then play and allies play in amplifying, advocating community voices?
I think I'm all for ERGs. I think they're really important, but I get frustrated with them and organisations that hold them, because often what you find is that the people that are running them are doing it on a voluntary basis. They're doing it over and above within their own work hours. It's almost a full-time job in itself. And ultimately, if those people running those ERG groups don't put that time and effort into it, nothing really happens. And it shouldn't be like that. Obviously, I'm all for, you know, making sure that, I personally think they should be paid roles for the people running them, because, you know, there's so much that goes into it. And so I think that there's still, I do think that there's a lot more that organisations can do to reflect that and show support. I think, though, on the face of what an ERG group is about, it is a great thing. It's really important. It's important to make sure that, you know, again, whatever ER group, you know, employment resource group you're part of, that you are interlinking with all the other groups. And again, you know, making sure, because again, from an intersectional perspective, there'll be many employees that maybe have, you know, can relate to various different ERG groups, you know, and again, that is a positive way to reflect the diversity within your organisation. So I think they're good. I think organisations can do a lot more to support them. And you know, personally, I'm all for paid roles within that.
Thank you, Saskia. Jeffrey, did you have your hand up?
I did, because this is a subject so close to my heart, having chaired an ERG for, you know, 9 years or best part of it at Macquarie. Yeah, Saskia, I'd love to be paid for doing that. That would be marvelous. It didn't happen, but I mean, it is recognised. I mean, the point I want to make here is ERGs. Yes, I mean, there are two types of ERGs. There are ones that are mandated and the ones that are organic, if you like, and they tend to be more organic, as in it is a groundswell of employees getting together and pulling together and saying, well, we've got some issues we'd like to bring to the fore here. And what's good about that is it goes to the heart of what you were just saying, Saskia, about it, the generally what people have been saying is, what do your employees actually want? I mean, what is what is concerning them inside and outside the organization? And an organic groundswell through an ERG is a pretty good way of taking the temperature of that. If you're an organization, organizations that create ERGs strategically and say, we need an ERG, let's create one, they don't necessarily get the buy-in. You don't, because it's imposed. It feels like a compliance type thing. It doesn't have that same groundswell of enthusiasm that really the best ERGs, like the one I used to chair, are very, they embody those values day to day. So there are pressure groups. There's a lot of things ERGs are there for, but as I believe one of their fundamental roles is a pressure group within the organization to get the organization not only to put its house in order internally, but also to act as a champion for change externally as well. And there's lots of ways that they can do that through all the things we've been discussing today. But even on a micro level, find out what your staff want, and are there causes that the staff are actually particularly interested in the community, which they can actually then get involved in supporting. So through sponsorships, or even getting the staff to spend time helping charities, becoming trustee. I'm a trustee of several charities as a result of the work I did. This is actually a really good way of getting organizations to help support grassroots progress within the community, not just within their own corporate space. So there are plenty of things that ERGs can do to pressure organizations to actually become, again, better agents of change.
Brilliant, thank you. We have another question actually coming from Melanie Wolfenden, and her question is, how do we get LGBTQ plus leaders at the table then? We've spoken about the role leaders have to play, about growing future leaders. How do we get LGBTQ leaders at the table to start affecting this change at all these different levels, community, organizational, national, policy level? And I open that up to the panel.
Okay.
Thanks, Nari.
Yeah, I think it's quite important to set a concrete goal within a company with regard to diversity and inclusion, for example. Once we have concrete goal, especially high goals to achieve in terms of diversity and inclusion, maybe LGBTQ plus people, then people try to get engaged with the initiatives concerning diversity and inclusions. That means I think employees have more chances to be trained, and I think that leads to future growth of the leaders who are really interested in diversity and inclusion. And once these type of leaders are promoted within a company, maybe regardless of the size of the company, size large or small, and the more we have this kind of leaders, then I think the plausible, realistic, impactful change can be brought by these leaders. I think that is one way. I think the role of large companies, especially one of the important roles of large companies, is a platform where many people gather and have many chances to be trained and talk directly with political level of discussions. At the same time, we have simultaneously have a chance to talk or have dialogue with local community people, so we can bridge, in a sense, between the political level discussion or more, micro scope of discussions. Then, and more importantly, I think from your opinions from everyone here, I think it's quite important to for all of us to be mindful of realistic change, how we can bring realistic change to the society, not just conceptual idea, but how to bring realistic, changes. And I think one idea that we don't think, even if Japan Airlines is, for example, is a large business in Japanese area. We have 35,000 employees in our whole JO group companies. However, we cannot achieve good goals only by ourselves. We need to collaborate with other people. It's a really important perspective, I think. Large companies or large businesses can collaborate with smaller businesses as well. When we try to achieve something, we don't need to do it alone, by your own. We can collaborate. And I think the function of large companies is, how can I say, we can play a role in a society that has influential impact or produce productive air, to the political level, even political level. So that is our important function. And once we can have it work fairly or appropriately in a society, I think we can achieve high goals together. Maybe, yeah. That's what I think about this.
Thank you, Nari, for sharing that. Does anybody else have something they'd like to add and build on to what Nari's said?
I think also, and that's such a great point, and I was kind of waiting for you to start with that, Nari. So thank you. But I think you've got to think, considering this is also a global summit, think about, obviously goals are really important. How far can I go with this? But your safety at the same time, depending on what part of the world you're in, we have to take into consideration that some privileges we may have in other countries, other people don't. And when you're talking about collaboration, Nari, it's so important that those companies, organisations that do maybe have more privilege, if they do collaborate, I think it's really important that they, for what they can do in their own company, again, really highlight the importance of, inclusion and why that's important as a corporation or just as humans, why that's so important. So I think it's definitely something that, you shouldn't feel alone on doing. And I think it's something that, like you say, you have to be realistic on. But the more you can collaborate, as you say, I think the more kind of a voice you'll have to work towards inclusion and positive change a lot sooner than if you feel like you're having to do this on a alone. And I think people watching today, if you can take anything away from that, is maybe thinking about how can I collaborate with other parts of the organisation on a global scale? What can we do to show solidarity, to show that, yes, your country may not support LGBTQ+ rights at this point, but as an organisation, we do, where you can. So I think that's a good point for people to kind of have something to think about in what they can do going forward.
And I think the collaboration point is also not even just within organizations, it's across organizations, right? I mean, organizations that are doing well in this space are role models for other organizations that would like to tread in those footsteps, if you like. So, the danger is without that, aspiration, it's very easy to get back into tokenism, right? So like, I want to be seen to be doing this, going back to the original question of how do we get leaders at the table? The easy win, if you like, would be a tokenistic approach. Just say, okay, I'm going to promote someone because, they have a minority characteristic, because they happen to be female, or they happen to be black, or they happen to be LGBTQ+. That doesn't achieve it. We don't want tokenism. We don't want to be promoted because we happen to be LGBTQ+. We want to not be promoted because of that. We want to be able to have a level playing field. The danger, there's a tension here because, the key mantra is you can't be what you can't see, right? We do have to have role models at the top. What we don't want is tokenistic role models. So, we need to make sure that, there's real valuable leaders there, and those will hopefully come up through the ranks as we keep having conversations like this. It will be something that will happen organically. If we try to push it, it's something we can accelerate. But what's very important is across organizations to see organizations who are doing this well can be, effectively organizational mentors for others who are trying to tread the same path.
Mm. Go ahead, Gurchathan.
I think excellent. All these points are really, really, really valuable. One element I would like to bring in as well is more of the personal and the learning, the psychological aspect of this and the individualistic aspect of this. this is a learning that we've seen from the feminist movement, especially men engaging as feminists. It's always, I'm a feminist because I've got a sister. I'm a feminist because I've got a wife. Or now I'm an LGBTIQ ally because of my son, my daughter, my child, or my uncle, blah, blah, blah. Great. But you're not doing it for you. You're doing it for others. When in fact, and I'd like to quote one of the leading LGBTIQ plus activists out there, Alok Fanon, non-binary, non-conforming trans person in the US, we're fine. We're okay. We don't need the allyship. You need to be an ally to yourself, because you know what? This is hurting you more than it's actually hurting us, because you are a victim to that system as well. And the moment you realize that patriarchy, misogyny is hurting you, actually, you're not actually gaining more out of it. You're gaining less because you can't be yourself. I think that is the moment when you have the aha moment. And that's when you're not just a feminist for your sister, for yourself, but you're a feminist for yourself. And you're an ally, you're a queer activist for yourself, because you believe in the liberation of not just others, but your own self as well. So your whole being. I think this is really critical for leaders to realize that as well. And that becomes a sort of behavior switch in their mind, I think. Thank you.
Gosh, thank you so much, everybody. It's just, I honestly could talk about this for the rest of the day, and there's sparks going off in my head, but unfortunately we only have 2 minutes left. So if I could just come to each of you to share an idea, a reflection, maybe a question or a challenge that you'd like to leave our delegates with, what would that be? Perhaps I can come to you first, Jeffrey.
Yeah, I mean, I've got two basically. One is very simple. If you see pinkwashing and you see tokenism, call it out. It's not acceptable. And you basically need to challenge the organizations and the people doing it either on a macro or micro basis to actually, step up and do something meaningful for throughout the time of the rest of the year, not just in June. And the second thing I would say is, we've talked an awful lot about community, and our community itself has been suffering an awful lot of division in recent years. There's been plenty of talk, about racism in Pride in London, and obviously, the elephant in the room is the whole anti-trans lobby that's happening, particularly in the UK at the moment. So, we do need to be, practice solidarity and focused engagement within the community to try to come across those divides, so we can recreate the solidarity where we were at our strongest. That's what we should be doing. I mean, much as we all hated Section 28, loathsome though it was, the one thing it did do was galvanize the community. Everybody pulled together, and we achieved incredible progress as a result of that. We do need that galvanization within this and solidarity within the community now, and reach out. We shouldn't be marginalizing, lesbians because they're terrified of coming out as lesbian because they might be considered transphobic. This is not acceptable. We have got to pull together as a community if we really want to make the most progress, and we can expect organizations, or we should be asking organizations to help us do that.
Thank you, Jeff. How about yourself, Nari?
Oh, thank you very much. And everyone, all of the comments were really inspiring for me. And as to your question, I think it's quite important to hold your interest or enthusiasm on the diversity and inclusion, because it's quite important to think that it's the only differences, I think, that brings us, values, new values or additional values. That is really good concept to share. So please just keep on your interest on this theme, and please try to think about what you can do to move things forward. Not what other people will do, but just what you need to do, or what you can do to move things forward. That's my thought. Thank you.
Thank you, Nari. How about yourself, Kajatan?
I'm muted. Some fantastic points, and I'm gonna. Mine would be more philosophical. Know who you are and understand who you are. I think a lot of that is key. I think a lot of people assume their gender identities, and I'm a man, but okay, what makes you a man, or what makes you straight? Who are you? Get to know who you are first, because I think before you can engage as an ally, I think that is a critical thing. As a leader, who are you? And then just to echo Jeffrey's point, solidarity, 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 not just within our communities, with other communities as well, across communities and groups, I think is really, really key as well. So, yeah, those are my two points. Thank you.
Thank you. And Saskia will end off on your thoughts.
And again, it's very similar to what everyone said on today's panel, because I think that just shows how important it is when we're talking about allyship. Again, you know, not just thinking about what you can do as an ally for other people, but, you know, what can you do to really make change? And as Gachathan said, you know, have the understanding of why is this really important, you know, for myself to move forward, as well as to make a difference within the community and outside. And I really do think, you know, as much as I'm very passionate and love our LGBTQ+ community, I think we actually really need to, in many ways, have a think and a step up to come together again. Because, you know, as Jeffrey said, when we're talking about what happens with Section 28 and how the community came together, I think people need to have a better understanding of really the reality of where we're at, and don't be complacent, thinking that because we've got RuPaul's Drag Race on, you know, on the telly, and because we've got Pride, and because we've got, you know, same-sex marriage and even LGBT inclusive curriculum and everything else, that we are there. Because honestly, when you think it doesn't affect you directly, it really, really does. So look it up, read up, and let's come together, because it's the only way we're going to really make a change.
Thank you so much to all of you, Nari, Gachathan, Jeff, and Saskia, for this morning. Really some phenomenal conversations, and we're going to enter into a little comfort break now. Our next session is a conversation with Raga de Silva in 10 minutes. So go and grab yourselves a cup of tea, and we'll see you in a short moment. Enjoy the rest of your days, everybody. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Happy Pride, everyone. Thank you. Bye.